Yeah.
It's working? Great. Okay, so then if you, there's no scoring, it's not like a quiz exactly, it's just suggests that if you rate yourself like 3, 4, 5, to where you feel like you disagree, to look back at those and kind of think about why you feel that way. So some of the examples say, I understand how culture can affect child rearing practices, such as discipline, dressing, toileting, feeding, self-help skills, communication. That's one where I feel like we have a lot of different opinions on what's appropriate with raising a child. I understand the impact of culture on life activities, such as education, family roles, religion and faith, and gender roles. I understand my clients' cultural norms may influence communication in many ways, including eye contact, personal space, use of gestures, comfort with silence and greetings. I was talking to one of my professors, and they said in one of the settings they worked in, there was a huge amount of, I can't remember, they were all kids of one specific ethnic group. They were all in special ed and receiving speech and language services, and it was all for pragmatics. They weren't making appropriate eye contact. They were uncomfortable with adults. And she came in and thought, could it be possible that maybe this is a cultural difference and people are just pushing them into receiving speech and language services? So those are things to consider in the case that you might actually misdiagnose somebody.
And we're still over-enrolling though in special ed.
Right. Yeah, and that's a huge...
Anyone that's different.
Yeah.
So poverty, gender sometimes, more boys, and then culture.
Yeah. Some other ones, I don't impose my beliefs on and value systems on my clients. I respect non-traditional family structures. So I really liked this, this checklist just to look through, because there's a lot of things to consider that you bring to the table that don't belong in your therapy room to be pushed on your clients. So that is on ASHA. ASHA has a whole section on cultural competency. So it's a good resource to start, actually. So then, understanding language disorders within the social context. So we already talked about how different languages with a bilingual person have different uses and contexts. So since language is a communicative tool and it's used for social purposes, you really need to understand the social context in which your client is using each language. And you have to consider that in a systematic way. So if you're considering the people and relationships that they're using each language with, the settings, and then what languages are used and how frequently they're used, then you can get a big picture of what languages they're using, and then maybe what language you need to be treating in, which we'll also get to, because that can be another complicated thing. So for example, if you're working with an adult female who speaks Spanish on the phone at work, you know that she needs to be speaking Spanish because that's a way she's making her income. She needs that for financial reasons. And then maybe she's reading in English with her son at home. So she needs that English as well because she is making an emotional connection with her child. So there's important social and functional uses for each language. So tools to get there. Collaborating with interpreters and translators. So this is, I will kind of do a brief overview of that. There's a lot to working with interpreters and translators. Skilled dialogue, and then ethnographic interviews. So I'm going to go over all of this, and then we will do a little case study. So interpreters and translators. So the primary goal is to preserve meaning when you're transferring what you're saying from one linguistic code to another. So because there's such a huge discrepancy between SLPs and then the languages of everybody in the United States, there may be a need at some point for you to use a translator or an interpreter to effectively communicate with your client, either in therapy or in communicating with their families. As you know, especially if you speak another language, you know that there's no real direct translations. You can't just translate from one language to the next and preserve all the meaning. For example, there was this direct translation of mental health in Hmong. It translates to dirty liver or difficult lungs. So it's just, if you're, speaking and your translator is just directly translating, think if your client or their family is listening and they're totally missing what is being said. So you need to explain key terms and concepts to your translator, preferably beforehand, because that will save some time. Avoiding professional jargon, big words, SLP words, those words aren't going to translate, so you're probably going to need to avoid them, especially online when you're speaking. And then this text also suggested that you ask for occasional back translations just to verify that the message was received. So what did you say? And just making sure you're checking in with your translator as you're working with them. So this method is a method for collaborating with interpreters and translators. It may seem like a pretty obvious method, but if you think about it in the work world, I'm still interning, but I haven't worked with an interpreter or translator, so I imagine that if and when I do, it may be in like a hurried kind of situation. I know it can be difficult to find somebody who speaks that language you might need. So a lot of times when you're working with a translator, you may not be thinking about working with them ahead of time. But it's really important to brief them before the interaction. That way you guys can get together and you can discuss what's going to happen. Since they aren't, they're probably not going to be another speech language pathologist. You'll want to discuss, why is this conversation happening, the purpose, any assessments you might be doing. If there's materials that they're going to need to be translating, you might want to give those to them beforehand and explain any key terms. Then there's the actual interaction. So when you're interacting, I'm sure you've been told before if you're working with an interpreter that you aren't supposed to look at them and then let them translate. You should be looking at the client directly. You're also going to need to slow your pace. I already said that. Avoid jargon, and you should probably give yourself more time. So I'm always thinking in the school context because that's where I'm interning right now. So if you're going to be in an ARD meeting, you probably need to block off double the time, just knowing that everything you're saying has to be translated and then maybe clarified back to you. It would take more time. And then debriefing. So you can review responses and discuss any impressions with that interpreter or translator. A lot of times they may be a really great resource to ask, did you notice anything about their linguistic pattern? Is there something I should know? They may know that culture and that linguistic diversity better than you, and so they could be a really good resource. Okay, skilled dialogue. So skilled dialogue is a method for thinking about interactions where there's a disagreement because of a cultural difference. So, this is kind of a funny drawing, but so skilled dialogue includes anchored understanding of diversity and a third space. So, anchored understanding of diversity, that's recognizing through your experience and also cognitively that people are different and might have different opinions from you, and that those opinions aren't wrong. So if you're a clinician and you're coming into a situation where there's a disagreement in how treatment should take place, a lot of times as a clinician you might think, I'm right and they're wrong and I need to convince them that they're right. And that may not always be the case. And so that step is just understanding that people have different brains and they may not think the same way as me, and that's okay. And so the third space idea is making it not be an either-or situation, but having a creative solution that actually works for both parties. So this is an easier said than done model. It's just a way to think about it because if you're butting heads and you think you're right and that person's wrong, you're not going to have the most effective treatment for your client. So an example of this is maybe in early childhood. I know you guys are an adult class, but some of you may end up working with kids. I'm very kid-minded, but so maybe in early childhood, a lot of early childhood is family-based. It's usually consulting. A lot of it is in-home. And you're usually training your parents as well in ways to interact with the child to get more communicative demand and just get them talking more. So maybe you come into a home and you're asking this mom to participate in the session, and she welcomes you in, but always ends up leaving the room and isn't getting on the floor and playing with her child. That could be really frustrating if you come in and say, this is the way it's going to work. We have to do this. You have to be playing this way. But the anchored understanding would be stepping back and recognizing, okay, so this isn't the way this mom plays with her child. Maybe there's big cultural reasons for that. This might be really new for her, and how can I respectfully talk to her about it and create a solution that works for both of us. So again, easier said than done, but skilled dialogue is a way to approach that with respect and being responsive to that other person, rather than just being annoyed with them. So it's necessary, because otherwise you won't get anything out of your client and your interactions, and you could also fail to develop a trusting relationship with that family, which could be really damaging. And this also totally applies to adult interactions as well, which I'm sure you can kind of think in the different, you guys have been talking about dysphoria? Yeah, you can think about those interactions. You'll be dealing with a lot of families. And a lot of, yeah, so even those you use family just as much if there is family around. So then the final tool is ethnographic interviews. So a lot of times when we do interviews, we have a lot of yes/no questions, one-word answers, and kind of a set of questions that you just need and aren't kind of thinking outside the box of. So ethnographic interviews are more open-ended questions. So that allows your client and maybe your family members to really share what's important to them and give you more information about their beliefs and values, rather than just kind of getting the facts. You may miss some really important pieces. And that's actually really crucial to assessment. So when you're going in and assessing a bilingual child or an adult, especially when you don't speak the language, the interview is where you're going to get the most information about what their needs are and where you're going to be most effective. So some examples of some ethnographic interview questions. As you can see, they're really, really broad. Tell me about a typical day for Mark before and after his stroke. So that way you're giving them a lot. You want to know what their big picture, their daily routine is. You could also ask them to describe a specific activity or event. So, how does Mark, how does he tell you when he needs something? What is his feeding routine like? I want to hear about your previous experiences in therapy. So you're asking about experience that's not, it's not super specific, so you can maybe get a lot from them. What kind of activities would you like Anna to participate in? So a lot of times you need to get to the root of what a family is expecting, what they want from speech and language therapy, especially when you're dealing with somebody who's older and has had a stroke or a TBI. You may have very little about what their life was like before that accident, and so you need to use their family to find out what they want treatment to focus on. Do they want to go back to work? Do they need to be working in Spanish so they can talk to their grandchildren? There's a lot to consider. Yeah, you can get all of those specific information and different categories and contexts. So that's ethnographic interviews. So I think, yeah, okay, case study time. So, give me my friend again. Papers. And yeah.
That's her culture.
Yeah. Come on, I was about to say, is anyone from Lebanon? Let me change
Someone look
it.
at her page. Oh yeah, look at her.
Easy answer. I know, I try to think, I know a lot of people from Lebanon, but
Oh really?
maybe I'll be, yeah.
Introduce me.
Yeah, I really could actually. So thinking about putting this into practice. Sarah is a 53-year-old female. She's originally from Lebanon, and she suffered a stroke 3 months ago. She's been living in the United States for 10 years with her husband and grown children. She didn't work prior to the accident. And prior to the stroke, she spoke Arabic, some French, and some English. Her husband speaks primarily Arabic. So I'm gonna come back to this, but, oh no, I'll just read it off here. So I have some questions that I want you guys to maybe work with a partner next to you, or you can work by yourself and jot down some ideas, and then we'll think about these these 3 different questions together. So, you got it. What information is needed about culture and language prior to treating Sarah? So again, these are really broad questions and there's no right or wrong answers, but if you're getting this and this is all you know about her, what do you need to know? What would you like to know if you could? What resources might be used to obtain that information? So where are you going to go to find out about Lebanese culture? Maybe you. And then who are you going to interview? What kind of questions might you ask? So think about those. And then we'll come back together. I'll leave this up so you can refer to it. There's purposefully not a lot of information because sometimes there isn't a lot.
I guess where she was.
I'm not going to collect these, but I am going to ask for your input.
I guess with the primary, this one's easy. It's right there. Like those. So where she was from? We have her 10 years. And she was. Okay, so this you'll be really good. What would you use? That's good stuff. So, start with the same, and then maybe put the question. What would you ask? Okay. Or this, what is she speaking? She put up the first slide. Even though I do have. Yes.
All right, so let's see. Escapes, I can type some of your ideas.
Oh, my
Woohoo! Okay, so what are some things that you thought of that might be information you need to gather about Sarah?
Where she's from.
Okay.
Cultural beliefs.
Sure.
I tell you, they're very smart. We're all very proud of them.
I'd want to know how her culture allows her to interact with a male clinician.
Yeah. For you. I'm like the only man pushing around.
Culture.
Her culture. Thank you. Anything else?
Where she lives now.
Yeah.
Socioeconomic appropriateness or inappropriateness, you know, with eye gaze or touch or et cetera.
What languages she spoke?
Yeah. What languages she spoke and probably where, with whom. All of those is good. Sorry, I was just gonna
That's good.
scroll down. Those are all really great things. Anything else that you really feel like we need to know? I know that it's a broad question. We need to know a lot, but this is a great place to start. Where are you going to get your information? And this is assuming you've never been to Lebanon. Maybe she's
Her husband.
Oh, what we talked about, it might be a good resource, is maybe watching like a video on YouTube or something of just like two people interacting, just kind of seeing like their communicative behaviors. And
Yeah, absolutely.
We love YouTube here.
YouTube's a great resource. There's so much on there now. You might be able to find something really specific. So maybe a video on YouTube?
Yeah, I said just researching the culture online.
Yeah.
Her husband
Yeah, her
Yeah, can
husband.
you
But you
learn
probably
family?
need an interpreter
and her kids.
Right.
and
So,
family.
Oh my gosh, I hope I get clients over
friends, friends who might be and then, what'd you say?
Her husband.
Oh yeah, her husband. And also interpreter.
Yeah.
It might be a stretch, but I would see if there were any Lebanese restaurants in the area, and then like go and see how they interact.
Yeah. So,
Finish a bakery.
yeah,
Yes. It's a big
looking for like Lebanese cultural spots.
Yeah.
What about her
Especially-
kids?
Kids? Oh, her kids, yeah, absolutely. Present children, they'll be your biggest resources because, like we
It's grown
said,
children too, so.
huh?
It was like grown children.
Yeah,
grown
and-
children.
If you think about it, they've been there for 10 years. She's in her 50s, but her children probably have had a greater need as if they were working to learn English. So yeah, that's a lot of, way to think outside the box. Good job, guys. Okay, so who are you going to interview and what questions might you ask?
Her husband, family, children.
Yeah. That's where I'd start. What are some specific questions you're going to ask them?
Maybe
Okay.
why she didn't work.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Ooh, be careful about that.
Or like if it was like a cultural
Maybe
Or
did she
something.
work before?
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't frame it, you frame it, you're just asking.
Okay.
Tell me about your work history, then she could say, didn't have one. Yeah.
Her work history. And yeah, I don't want to discount that you couldn't interview her directly, but as you know, somebody 3 months post-stroke, depending on the severity, may have really limited skills. Maybe you are going to be able to interview her directly, but you'll definitely want to be.
We wouldn't ever though say, Rebecca, why didn't you work?
Right.
Because that's intimating that being in the home is not work, which we know,
Right.
it's a lot of work. Right, so
Right.
you have to be real
So
careful.
you want to
Yeah.
find
That-
out why she didn't work.
Just
Yeah, that's
general,
what I meant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
right.
Find out
I'm
why.
with you.
If there was
Yeah.
anything.
Yeah, that's phrasing is everything. Yes.
If you were to interview like her immediate family, you could ask what was she like prior to the stroke
Yeah.
and post-stroke.
Yeah.
She thought it was. We're not cheating.
She wants
We're
me
not
to
cheating.
He was in mine.
So yeah,
She's off to do music.
that's a great way to probe for changes.
Thought about just if we're interviewing the kids or the family, like maybe they're not culturally aware, so like asking them, what do you see that's different between your family and your friend's family or stuff like that.
Yeah, so that's a good one. What do you see that differentiates? Maybe we don't use differentiate. Your family. That might be a way to find out the family routines, how much they're all together, and what's kind of expected within their culture to maybe get to it in a polite way. because, you know, we don't want to offend anyone.
Or tell me about your family.
Mhm.
I don't know
Yeah.
about
Or
the
what are some things you
differentiate.
did together, stuff like that?
Take it, oh, look, I've done this 35 years, Rebecca, I know all. Do not,
Yeah, you.
you have to be really careful about how you phrase things,
What
okay?
are
Because you
the
don't want to
family-
offend anyone.
You could also maybe
Yeah.
talk to family friends.
Yeah, I put down neighbors as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
If they give permission.
My parents have friends. My parents have friends. Sometimes.
Yeah, just because she doesn't work doesn't mean she isn't interacting with people outside of her family, so those could be good resources. Anything else? You guys
Find
are,
out what some of her favorite activities were.
yeah,
That's a good one, yeah.
tell me about activities. Yeah, especially when you're developing a therapy plan for an adult who isn't going back to work necessarily. You're gonna wanna find out, what do you want Sarah to be able to do from therapy? So finding out what she is doing and what activities she needs language for is gonna be really important. Yeah, I'm not gonna blow that back up to a slide because it won't fit. But in summary, thank you guys so much for listening. And this was kind of a really brief overview of looking at cultural issues, but it will come up a lot if you end up going to grad school. It will come up even more, especially at a university like this where we do think about what it means to be culturally and linguistically diverse. So that is a really good advantage to attending the University of Texas. So if you have any questions, without this, I'll send this to Dr. N so she can put it on Blackboard. So you can just have it as a resource. You'll get a lot of stuff that you won't need right now, but maybe helpful later. And there's also, I have a reference page, so there's more articles you can look up from this as well. So, yeah.
Let's give her an applause. And now they're done.